Okay, so first, I apologize for the dirtiness of this table and my super old cutting pad. We are going to do some repair on this pair of wings here. I'm just going to focus on one little area. I think I'm going to do this little triangle here. So, say you've got a hole in your thing. Sometimes, if you've got an individual cell here, like if this were just one color, I used a whole sheet for these wings, so the different cells aren't separate. Sometimes, but if you do have a separate color on one piece and you can get under the lip of it, you can usually peel it off, but sometimes that's a little risky because you could end up peeling off the other pieces too. So what I usually do when I have a pretty big tear in a section, I will cut it out. So you want some really, really sharp scissors, an X-Acto knife, razor blade, whatever, and you're just gonna slice into it and try to cut it out as close to the wire without cutting directly onto the wire. You want there to be a little bit of overlap. So I'm leaving probably like 1/8 of an inch. So we're gonna cut this whole section out and just replace it with a new piece. So now what you want to do, this is what I use. It is called Fantasy Film. You can get it. There's the website right there, artglitter.com. And I don't know how much they are now. They used to be about $7.50 for a roll of, like, I think it's 10 feet by 4 inches. And if you want to know what color you have, you can replace it with any color you want. But if you're trying to get the same color, send me a picture and I'll do my best to guess and remember what colors they are. I'm pretty familiar with all these colors, so I can tell you if you need me to. I'm going to use this one just so we can see it against all the other stuff. This one is called Into the Forest. It's one of my faves. It's a nice dark green with blues and purples in it. I love it. Okay, so what you're gonna do is cut out a piece for the section you're trying to repair. Actually, cut out 2 pieces. You'll need to line it up, and you want to make sure you've got plenty of extra on the edges. If you don't have enough overlap, you're not going to get a good seal when you go to iron it on. So, and I do try to be conservative with my film. I try not to cut too much bigger than what I need, but that's good. I'll do another one of those. This is hard to do with the camera right in the middle. Cut another one. And then you're gonna need to glue your pieces on. I like to use glue sticks. I think it's the easiest. It's the least messy, and it dries really fast. And this one here, this Scotch craft stick, is my fave. It's very tacky. Comes out really tacky, so your pieces stay on. They stay stuck before they get a chance to dry. You could use a regular glue stick. I have used just a basic Elmer's school glue before. They're fine. They work fine. They're just not quite as strong, and they won't give you the tackiness that can be very helpful. I can't get... And the cap is glued shut. So we're gonna use this because my cap is glued shut. And what you're gonna do, you wanna get it right on the wire. Get it right where the frame is. Go over it a couple times to make sure it's good and coated. Then fit your piece. And just smooth it out over the wire to make sure everything is sticking. I'll do the other side. And if you've got a pointy part, how this one goes down to a point like this, make sure that your film is going far beyond that point. You don't want to just like stop it right here, you know, because these wires go all the way down to where the wires meet. Otherwise, if you don't, you're gonna get a weird shape. It's gonna mess up your shapes. I don't think I cut this very well. It's okay. This is a tutorial. I don't think I made this big enough to go down to the point where the wires meet. You also want to make sure that you've got plenty of extra on the edges. When you seal it up around the edges, you need these films to fuse together. You need there to be enough overlap on either side so that they can actually stick to each other. All right, so I have to recut this piece. It's not good. They do sell this stuff in very large sheets also. I only use those if I'm making a large pair of wings or if I'm making a set that I know is just going to be all one color, because they're like $25. Maybe more now. Who knows? Okay, that's better. So the next thing you want to do is wait a little while. Wait for your glue to dry a little bit. It doesn't have to be all the way dry, but you want it to be on there fairly decently. Decently? Is that a word? I get impatient sometimes, and I don't. But if I do get impatient, I will flip back to the first side I glued, so I know it has had at least, a few minutes to dry. And then what you're gonna do is trim. So the trimming part, make sure you've got a good pair of sharp, tiny scissors. Tiny scissors are best. I've used big scissors before. It's just awkward, and it's just awkward. Okay, focus. So I slide in under the film and then get to the sweet spot in the scissors, and we're just gonna trim the excess. And again, you want to leave about 1/8 of an inch overlap on the other side of your wire. See, the wire is here. You want a little touch of overlap, about 1/8 of an inch overlap on the other side. Curves are always tricky, so what I do is cut into the middle up to the curve and then start from there. I always take a little extra care around the point areas to make sure that I've got a nice pointed shape in the film itself, because that'll show. So I make sure that this film is coming to a nice pretty point and following the lines of the wing. So that looks pretty good. Looks pretty clean. I hope you can see that. Okay, now we'll do the other side. Occasionally you may have to go in and just put a little more glue. That's fine. Now this I don't like how high this is coming up, so I'm going to trim this off a little bit so it starts again right where these two wires meet, and it's gonna gracefully go down to a nice point. Just gonna use a little more glue here. And again, going into the curve, cut right up to it. Start from the middle and go out. Okay, so that's that side. All right, so that side's done. That side's done. Now we're going to iron it. You will need parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, you could also use like a cotton sheet. I've done that before. The only thing is it does leave kind of a texture onto your film, but that's okay with you. It might look cool. But parchment paper is the best. And I do usually use a regular iron, but I don't have an iron. We left a lot of stuff behind in California before we moved. So I'm using this little heated planchette. It's cool because it's small and I can get to little grooves, but it does not have all the heat settings I would like. And it's a little pointy. Sometimes it'll like poke a hole through my parchment paper and then burn my film. But I usually use a regular iron on not the first, but probably the second setting. I don't know what your iron is like, but whatever it is for synthetics, all irons are different. So a good idea is to test your iron first. Try out the different settings. This is considered a polyester film. So try the synthetic setting or polyester setting, whatever you have, and see if that works. And just adjust accordingly. If it's not hot enough, your film's not going to fuse. If it's too hot, you're going to burn right through it. So give it a try, test it out. I usually use the synthetic setting. But all I have on this is low and high. So I'm going to do my best. All right, so get your parchment paper, however big of a piece you need. Just using this little guy. You're going to put it right on top. Make sure you have a heat-friendly surface beneath. Also, I usually use cardboard, and I also usually put parchment paper on the front and the back, which I should do. I usually put some under. Normally I would use a bigger piece. Just trying to use what I have. And some on top. That way you make sure the film on the bottom isn't going to stick to whatever you're using underneath. So the first thing you're going to do is go over your seams. You're going to go over all the areas where the film overlaps with the other sections. Just on the wire. Just do on top of the wire first. That way you can make sure that that is sealed and connected and it's not going to come off on you when you're doing the rest of the piece. And again, you'll have to practice with this to figure out just how hot you want your iron to be and also how slowly you need to move, because you want to give your film time to melt. You can kind of see the difference where it's fused with the other film. Gosh, I do not like this thing. I also don't like that, like my regular iron had this nice Teflon coating on it, so it moved very smoothly over the wire. This just feels like it's scratching it all up. Okay, I think you can see the difference here, where this is fused with the other one. You can see the different little spots of color poking through. And you can tell when it's melted with the other film. One thing you can also do at this point, after you've sealed it, you can, if you notice there's a little extra trimming that needs to be done, like right here. This is overlapping a bit too much for my liking, so I'm going to trim off a little bit more. That's better. And if you're doing the edges, if you have to go outside of the frame, I usually turn my iron up a little bit more. Just to really make sure these two films are fusing together. You want to stay as close to the wire as possible. I like to hug right up against it. So this isn't hot enough. I gotta wait for this to heat up. Okay, that looks like it's fusing pretty good. So, I'm gonna go to the edge. Make sure we get right in there. A little test. Yes, that looks good. I will do this usually on both sides before I go in and start cutting into the details and all that. So again, I can see on this side it needs to be trimmed in a little more at the curve. It's also just not a very pretty line. I don't like it to be all jaggedy if I can help it. Sometimes you can't help it. But if you can, fix it. So now that all the edges are pretty well fused on there, see if it looks better if I turn this light off. Okay, yeah, that looks better. So now that all the edges are fused on there, on both sides, whoop, we can go in and start doing this and start sealing the little overlap areas and cutting in. See how it's all snug against the wire on these other parts? We're gonna do the same thing around here. I think I'm actually going to keep that light off. This seems to be a lot easier to see. Okay, so I'm going in right up against the wire using the edge of my iron. You're going to want to do that too. Just use the edge of your iron. You don't want to do it flat because you're going to end up heating this one too much. I'm going on the edge again. It's really important. I mean, you go over the contact points as many times as you need to make sure that it's sealed. You don't want it lifting up on you later. And I always do one side and one side. When I do one thing on one side, I flip it over and do it on the other. I don't typically go through all the steps on one side before doing it on the other side. I go back and forth a lot. Sorry for me breathing right into the camera. Remember to breathe. I notice that I tend to hold my breath when I'm doing arts and crafts. So remember to breathe. Fairies, remember to breathe. If your film starts looking kind of raggedy and it's getting a bunch of holes in it, just swap it out for a new piece. This one's fine, but they do start to wear out and you do need to get a new piece at some point. Sometimes I'll also just swap them. I'll put the raggedy one on the bottom, start putting the nicer one on top. These all look good. You can need a little bit more over here. Ouch! Don't burn yourself like I just did. Okay, now we can go into the middle. I always start in the very center. And you're gonna have to figure out how to work this with your own iron. I usually move pretty quickly at first, just to make sure I'm not burning a hole through anything, and work my way out. And again, you may need to try out using different parts of your iron, different angles, see what works. See, that was not even. There we go. So it looks like I need to hold it just a little bit longer on the film. Move a little bit more slowly. And get all the way into those crevices and corners and nooks and crannies. I love that word, crannies. Sounds like a dirty English euphemism. Also, make sure that your wing is flat on your surface, because if it's popped up and you're pushing through it, you're gonna end up, it's gonna end up being all blobby. I don't know how to describe that. So always try to make sure it's flat. So at this point, you're just gonna be kind of hopping around, working on a section, checking it to see if it's fused with the other side, going back this way, that way. There isn't really any rhyme or reason to this part of the process. You're just trying to make sure all of those little areas are fused together. You can see when it's fused together because it starts to get these little wrinkly patterns, and you can't see that there's any air between the spaces. And we just keep flipping back and forth, going over all the little spots that you see, any area that needs more attention. So I just noticed as I was going down this edge that these films separated. So these need some extra attention. I might need to heat up my iron hotter and get this. Just move more slowly. Anytime you see stuff like that while you're going around, address it as soon as you can, because the more you heat the wire, the more it tightens up and the harder it is going to be to do certain things. You gotta make sure that your edges are sealed. That looks better. Alright, so it's looking pretty good here. I also noticed that right here, there's this little flap that's not sealed down, so I'm going to fix that. Again, these are things you notice as you go along. And when I am doing these hugging the wire pieces, I'm focusing a lot more on pushing inward against the wire than I am down onto the film, because you could end up just burning through right here, and you don't want that, and you'll have a hole before you. So this looks pretty good. I'm checking around and it looks like all the areas, oh, I found another flap. Alright, so that looks pretty good. What we're gonna do now is trim off the excess from the edge of the wing. So with this, you probably want to leave yourself, I'd say at least 1/4 to a 1/2 inch. Maybe not a 1/2 inch. I'd say like 1/4 inch. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your iron or whatever you're using, and you're just going to go directly perpendicular to your film and just kind of slowly melt it down. You're going to push it down slowly as the iron melts it. You're going to just press that down. You may need to wiggle it around, go around the sides a little bit. I also tend to turn my iron up for this, because you want it to be hot enough to just melt that plastic down. Now you could go around and clean up the edges, any parts that are like hanging off, melt those down. You'll notice again during this process, you'll notice if your two sides aren't sealed together properly because they'll separate. So if that's an issue, you can try to go back and pinch them together. You can also reseal any vulnerable spots with this during this process. So that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good and sealed up. I probably will go over this again with a hotter iron just to make sure that these rough parts look a little more smooth and a little more pretty. And also like these little scraggly bits, clean those up. But now at this point you can go with your heat. Alright, so heating time. I use one of these bad boys. You don't have to use one of these. When I first started making wings, I used a lighter, and I can't find my lighter. So the lighter method is basically this. You hold your lighter underneath your wings. I'd say give it at least a good 6 to 8 inches. And then you're just gonna kind of play around really quickly. You don't want to, it heats up really fast. So you just want to kind of hold your lighter underneath it and move it around quickly and watch the film tighten. And it happens fast, so don't put it too close, at least 6 to 8 inches, and you can kind of play around with the distance and how long you need to take. You could also use like a tea light if you don't want to keep flicking a lighter. I used to get a blister on my thumb when I did that way. You could also use a stovetop if you have an electric stove. I've done that before. Again, you want to hold it, I would say give it at least a foot over the stovetop, and you can kind of lower it and move it away depending on how hot it is and play around with it. But I'm going to use my heat gun. I usually have it on low at about 850, and then we're gonna heat it. Hopefully you can see that tightening happening. Let's see the film start to tighten up. This is also where you will once again see spots that might need to be gone over again. See, I can already see right there, it's not fused together fully here in the corner, and there's this little flappy flap. So you can take a moment. I always keep my iron on during this process because you might need to use it to do any touch-ups. So we're going to do a little touch-up. You definitely want to do this before you get done with the heating process, because once that film is taut, it's really hard to fix these parts. It's not impossible, but you could run the risk of breaking your film and having to start all over again. And we're going to seal this puppy up. I got this at Michael's, by the way, if you do want to get one. I don't remember how much it was. I got it so long ago. But you have to be careful because I have it on high, and a high with this little thing is typically too hot. So I have to move very fast. Okay, now we can go back again. I might turn this up. And that's it. This was a little bit of a sloppy job, but that's okay. We're just doing a little tutorial. That should do it. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to just patch up your cracks, you can probably do that with a glue gun. If you want to cut a little piece of film to use it as a patch, you can, but it will be obvious even if it's the same color. You can try patching it with a glue gun, but my standard practice is to just replace the film altogether. But now you know. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Bye.